Welcome back. I was explaining to you about the Passover and the Passover, how they chose the Paschal lamb on the 10th, which happened to coincide with the Palm Sunday. When the lamb is chosen, a few days they feed specially, and then on the Passover day, the lamb is taken to the temple. The priest blesses that lamb, and then people take the lamb back home, and there they kill it, they cut it by noon and roast it before 6 o'clock in the evening, ready for the Passover meal. They will have the Passover meal after sunset. So before that, all this must be ready. Again, the early Christians noticed the great coincidence. When the Jews were actually sacrificing the Passover lamb, killing the Passover lamb, Jesus was killed on the cross. By noon, Jesus died. That was the time the Passover lamb was killed. And they noticed, the early Christians noticed this great coincidence, that when the Passover rules were observed by the Jews, all those rules were equally applicable to Jesus. And that made the early Christians understand that was the Passover, new Passover lamb, new Passover sacrifice. In Jesus' time, the number of Jews had grown, and in Jerusalem there will be such a crowd. It was difficult in one day to get all the sheep to be blessed by the priests and so on. So the elders, Jewish elders, decided that the Passover could be observed on 2 days. That year when Jesus was crucified, actually the Passover was on Friday, on Good Friday. But that time already this provision was there that they could observe also Thursday as Passover day. And that is how the Last Supper takes place. The Last Supper takes place on Thursday, following those rules and those provisions. So the Last Supper becomes the Passover meal, and the Jews would also consider it as real Passover. We, on Maundy Thursday, in the evening, we commemorate that great event. There will be some confusion. People will often ask, is that the Passover? As I already said, the elders decided they could celebrate it on 2 days, so that the rush in the temple of Jerusalem will be reduced. There will be a little more of convenience for the people. Otherwise, Jerusalem will be so crowded that all those rituals would be difficult. And because of that, the 2 days celebration. And look at our new Passover. New Passover on Thursday, and the real Passover on Friday, on Good Friday. With this Passover celebration, the custom or the rule of eating only unleavened bread, the prescription is in the Bible, the Jews kept it. And interestingly, even now, those 7 days, anywhere in Israel, you will get only unleavened bread. The normal bread, which is leavened, will not be available. Even if you want to, you cannot purchase. There won't be anywhere in Israel leavened bread. they are so strict with all those observations, and they have its meaning, but the meaning is given in the Bible, they follow all of them. So much regarding the festival of the Passover. The second festival that I would like to briefly bring to your attention and explain is the Feast of Weeks, or simply Pentecost. From the Passover, 7 weeks, and then after the 7 weeks, they offer special barley bread. That is the beginning of the wheat harvest. All these festivals are connected with their day-to-day life, and in this case, it's the barley harvest, and then afterwards the wheat harvest. The barley, the first barley is taken, and a special bread is prepared. It's called omer, and that is offered to God in the temple. Because it happens on the 50th day after Easter, that feast got the name Pentecost, 50th day. We also have that Pentecost with a different meaning. The meaning is, all of you know how the Holy Spirit comes down onto the disciples and so on. So that event is commemorated in that way. In the late Judaism, they linked it with also the 10 Commandments. They linked it with the 10 Commandments, especially commemorating that great event that God appeared to them on Mount Sinai and gave them the 10 Commandments. We need not necessarily connect it with the 10 Commandments. For us, we have our own Pentecost with the new meaning, that is the day the Holy Spirit comes down. With this celebration of the weeks or the Pentecost, we move to the third one, the third major feast, which is called the Feast of Booths. That was actually the end of the harvest. After the harvest, all the grain and so on is gathered and brought home. And then, when all that is brought home from the fields, those tents are all pulled out, because often during the harvest time, people would simply spend the days, day and night, in the field. Now that's all pulled out and they go home. But before going home, they have a celebration, and that is called the Feast of Booths. For the Feast of Booths, in fact, this is the most joyful occasion for them. It is very popular, even more than the Passover. Passover is very strict. We have to follow all those rules and so on. Whereas the Feast of Booths is something that they can really celebrate with the singing and dancing. For 7 days, practically all Israel will spend in temporary tents, not in their home. So 7 days to remember that once upon a time their ancestors lived in tents, and therefore that is commemorated in this way, and they celebrate. They celebrate, and this is the most joyful celebration that they have, and because of that they will simply call that feast the feast. Nothing more, that is the feast of Yahweh. I will stop with this. We will continue with the celebrations of feasts next week. Meanwhile, think of the Passover, think of the Pentecost, think of the Feast of the Booths. They all have wonderful meanings. All the best to you. We will see next week again.